Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the Ethereum Name Service, ENS.
Right, ENS. It's becoming a really key piece of Web3 infrastructure.
Exactly. Think of it like a directory service for this new phase of the internet. We're going to unpack what it is, why it's important, and where it might be heading.
We've looked at, the core ENS docs, announcements from places like Coinbase,
Yeah.
trying to pull out the really crucial stuff for you.
Our mission, as always, is to distill the key insights. So let's start with the basics. What is ENS, fundamentally?
Well, at its heart, ENS solves a big usability problem in crypto. You know those super long, complicated Ethereum addresses, like 0x followed by a jumble of letters and numbers?
Yeah, totally intimidating and easy to mess up.
Exactly. ENS lets you swap that for a simple, readable name, like vitalik.eth, for example.
Ah, okay. So instead of the long string, you just use a name people can actually remember.
Precisely. And that simple change makes everything so much easier. Sending money, using dApps, setting up your digital identity, it just feels more, well, human.
It really lowers the barrier to entry, doesn't it? Remembering mycoolwallet.eth is way easier than that massive address.
For sure. And this isn't some brand new thing either. ENS actually launched way back in 2017.
2017. Okay, so it's had some time to mature.
Definitely. And it's gained real traction. When you see big players like Uniswap and Coinbase integrating it, that tells you something. It's moved beyond just a cool concept.
It's becoming pretty foundational infrastructure.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is the philosophy behind it. It ties directly into those core Web3 ideas like user sovereignty and censorship resistance.
How so? What makes it different from, say, traditional domain names?
Well, because your .eth name is recorded on the Ethereum blockchain, you actually own it. It's not controlled by a central company like GoDaddy or someone.
Ah, okay. So it's truly yours. No one can just take it away arbitrarily.
Right. That gives you much more control over your digital identity, and it makes it way harder to censor or seize your online presence. It's quite a powerful shift.
Okay, that makes sense. So building on that, here's something for you listening to think about. How does just owning a simple name like .eth actually give you more freedom and control in this digital world? Let's dig into that.
Yeah, let's maybe go back a bit to the early days, say 2017 to 2019. This is when we saw what people now call PrePunk domains being registered.
PrePunk domains, what are those?
Think of names like wallet.eth or nft.eth, really fundamental, often single-word names. They were snapped up by the real early birds, the enthusiasts who jumped in before ENS was widely known.
PrePunk, I like that term. So they're kind of like the original digital real estate of Web3, the pioneers staking their claim.
You could definitely say that. It's a bit like getting a really prime.com name back in the early days of the web. There's a historical weight to them.
Yeah, I can see that. A cultural significance almost.
Absolutely. Culturally, they're often seen as like the OG NFTs of identity.
Right.
They represent that belief in the tech before it was popular. Digital artifacts, you could say.
So what's the status of these names now? Are the original enthusiasts still holding them?
Some are, maybe. But like with many rare digital items, a lot of these pre-punk names are now held by collectors, speculators, people who recognize their historical or potential financial value. Not always the initial believers.
Interesting. Which brings up a question. Are these early eth names basically the digital equivalent of those super valuable single-word .coms? What makes wallet.eth valuable beyond just being short? Is it just scarcity?
Scarcity is definitely part of it, and that early adopter status for sure. But there's also like this cultural cachet within the Web3 space. Owning one signals you were there early, you understood the vision.
Right, a kind of badge of honor.
Yeah, exactly. It carries weight. But, this value in the early rush also created a challenge: high costs.
Which leads us nicely into the next big development, layer 2.
I guess, the infamous gas fees. Everyone in crypto knows about those. Transacting on Ethereum's main network, layer 1, could get really expensive. Extremely. And that included things like renewing your ENS domain registration every year. The cost could sometimes be, well, prohibitive for regular users.
Making ENS less accessible than intended, right?
Exactly. So, the solution: moving ENS functions to layer 2 networks. These L2s are built on top of Ethereum, but offer, dramatically lower transaction fees.
Okay, so moving renewals and registrations and stuff off the expensive main chain.
Precisely. And alongside this move, we got ENS v2.
ENS version 2? What was the big leap forward there?
One of the key things in ENSV2 is hierarchical registries. It sounds a bit technical, but basically instead of one massive contract managing everything, each month name gets its own little mini contract, often living on an L2.
Okay, so breaking it down, making it more modular.
Yeah, exactly. It makes the whole system more efficient, faster, and cheaper to interact with.
So for the average person holding a .eth, what does this practically mean? What are the real benefits of ENSV2 and L2?
The bottom line for you, the user, is mainly two things. Much cheaper renewals, so you don't get hit with huge gas fees just to keep your name, and faster transactions when you manage it.
That sounds like a huge improvement for usability.
Well, it is. It makes ENS potentially much more accessible for, well, everyone, not just whales or early adopters.
So connecting the dots, could this L2 migration genuinely make .eth addresses as common and easy to get as .com domains are today? What would that kind of shift mean for online identity?
That's really the big vision, isn't it? By slashing the costs and making it easier, ENS on L2 could become a really foundational layer for identity online, giving people actual ownership and control in a way traditional systems just don't.
A fundamental change in how we manage who we are online.
Potentially, yes.
Huh.
But as ENS grows, this other issue pops up. Balancing the needs of big brands with the contributions of those early adopters.
Right, the PrePunk holders we talked about. How do you handle that?
It's a definite balancing act. ENS introduced something called the name wrapper. This lets brands, for example, effectively lock their trademarked .eth name, like Nike.eth, to prevent others from squatting on it.
Okay, that makes sense for brand protection. You don't want misuse of established trademarks in Web3.
Absolutely. But then what about the individuals? What about someone who registered a name early on, maybe in good faith, that a big company now wants?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Where's the line?
That's the tension. You have the legitimate need to protect brands, but you also have this community of early believers who took a risk. How do you recognize their contribution without undermining decentralization?
Are there specific ideas being discussed for recognizing those PrePunk holders?
Yeah, there are ongoing talks in the community. Some ideas involve things like maybe giving holders of these very early names, these pre-punks, a bit more voting power in the ENS DAO.
The DAO, that's the Decentralized Autonomous Organization that governs ENS.
Right. Exactly. So more, say, in future decisions. Another idea is maybe attaching special metadata badges to these early domains, sort of visually marking them as historically significant.
Like a digital blue plaque.
Kinda, yeah. It acknowledges that provenance, that I was here early factor, because owning wallet.eth from 2018 isn't just functional, it's like owning a piece of Web3 history. That historical weight is a big part of their perceived value.
So it's about finding ways to honor that history without, like, creating an aristocracy that blocks future growth or fairness.
That's the tightrope walk. How do you value the past without making it unfair for newcomers or hindering the network's evolution? It's a really core Web3 challenge, actually.
Definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
How can the wider Web3 space learn from this, balancing big players and pioneers? Is there a good way to do it?
It's something the whole space is grappling with. It really forces communities to think hard about their values, about incentive design, and, what a truly decentralized future looks like long term.
Okay, so for listeners who are now maybe thinking about ENS or curious about those PrePunk names, what can they actually do? Where can they look or get involved?
Well, if you're just curious about pre-punks, you can check out secondary NFT marketplaces, like OpenSea is a big one. You can see which early names are listed, get a feel for the market, the history.
See what's out there.
Exactly. And more generally, if you want to actually have a say in where ENS goes next, the best thing is to get involved with the ENS DAO. That's where the decisions happen, through community governance.
Right. Join the discussion, understand the proposals, maybe even vote if you hold the ENS token.
Yeah, participate. It's open.
Okay. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If you get a .eth name, could that become a really valuable part of your digital legacy down the road? What kind of digital future are you actually building with that identity?
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? A user-owned internet identity.
It really is. Think about the wider impact if that becomes standard. How society might change. It's fascinating stuff.
Definitely a lot to consider as this all unfolds.
For sure. Okay, so let's quickly recap what we covered in this deep dive. We talked about the basics of ENS, simplifying those tricky crypto addresses.
We looked at the pre-punk domains, their history, their sort of cultural significance as early Web3 artifacts.
Then the big move to layer 2 with ENSV2, making things cheaper and faster, much more accessible.
And finally, that ongoing challenge. balancing brand protection with recognizing those crucial early adopters.
The main takeaway really is that ENS is much more than just a shortcut for an address.
Absolutely. It's potentially a foundational piece for user-controlled identity, making Web3 more usable and, well, more decentralized for everyone.
So we definitely encourage you to explore more. Check out ENS domains, think about what decentralized identity means for you, and maybe even look into the ENS DAO.
Yeah, dive in.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.